So far, the only object or control that we've worked with is the label. So let's expand our horizons a little bit and work with a button. Labels and buttons are probably the two most used controls in iOS. And to start our project, we're going to get a button. And conveniently, it's right under the label. I'm also going to add a label to our project. And we'll use this label as just a little bit of status. So we'll just say it's not clicked. When we click the button, we'll update the label text. So the button has a number of attributes, and some are very similar to what we already saw with the label. We of course have the text. And we have a font size. And of course the same kind of font properties. And we have text color. And of course, this is a little bit unusual in terms of the way this UI looks. And you have to be a little bit careful and take a look at the iOS UI guidelines when you're building up your user interfaces. But this button now has the same font color as the label, and it doesn't have a border by default, so it looks like a label. So it's not necessarily obvious to the user that you're supposed to click it. So just be aware of those kinds of things when you're going through. So there are a number of other attributes you can set as well. But let's get to the meat of what we want to do. We want to handle the click event on the button. So we want to create a connection. And of course, we'll use the assistant editor so we can see our view controller code. And previously, we created a referencing outlet. And we can do that for the button. And you'll note that the type is UI button now. I'm also going to want a referencing outlet for the label. Okay, but that doesn't tell me when the button is actually clicked. So I'll use the touch up inside event and I'll create an action handler. And the action handler has a type, and that can be any object or UI button. This is the parameter called sender that will be given to the action method. So you can see here's my action method, button touched, and my sender is the UI button. So if I want to do anything with the button, I can use that parameter sender. So I don't actually need this outlet that I created. I can just use the button touched. All right, so let's put a little code in that button touched event. I want to set the label text. I'd also like to set the button's text. My sender property is of type UI button, so I can work with that object. So I'm going to look for the text property, but that's kind of odd. There isn't any one. Perhaps it's a set text. Well, close, set title, and it's actually a method. And if we look at that method signature, it has two pieces. It has the title, which is a string, and that's pretty obvious what that does. But then there's also a forState parameter. and it's a UI control state. And that's because the button has different states. A normal state would be when the button has not clicked, and a highlighted state would be when the button is depressed. So we can actually change the button text depending upon different control states. And that's true of a number of different controls as well. So let's set it for the normal control state. And now to see the effect of that, let's also set it for the highlighted state. And that's when the user is in the action of depressing the button. So let's see the effect of this, and note that we're doing this on the button touched event. So initially when this form comes up, we're going to see the button with the Click Me label, and it's not until after the button is actually touched that these other titles that we're setting here will come into effect. So when the app first comes up, the button title is indeed Click Me, just like we set up in the designer. And of course, the label says not clicked. When we click the button, its title becomes Button Normal. That's because we've run through the button touched event handler, and we've set the title to Button Normal, and the button is now in the normal state. And of course, the label also says that the button has now been touched. And now because we've run through that handler, we also set the title for the UI control state highlighted. So let's see that effect. I'm going to click on the button and hold the mouse down. And you can see now the title says Button Highlighted. When I release the mouse, it'll go back to Button Normal. Highlighted and Normal. So now you can see the effect of the set title method. And this method applies to a lot of different controls and also applies to a lot of different control states. So you can apply it to more than just normal state and highlighted state. In fact, a large use of it can be for the enabled state. The button might say something different when it's disabled as opposed to when it is enabled, perhaps giving the user an idea how they might enable the button's property. So in this lesson, you've learned how to work with the button. And of course, the most important thing is handling the button touched event, because after all, that's what the button is for.